you see way up in the sky? Making circles in the morning sun, flying high in the sky till the day is done. I can't break away. Like a child in his fantasy, punching holes in the walls of reality. All my life I wanted to fly, but I don't have the wings, and I wonder why. Break away. Oh, well, Mama told me when I was young, stand tall, girl, you're number one. But you can be what you wanna be, but you can't change the course of your destiny. I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away. I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away. Ooh, I can't break away.
Duke is on deck.
Greetings, my excellent friend.
We got Dotson here. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, festive Kwanzaa, whatever your holiday persuasion is. Thank you for coming in here and hanging out with me this evening. For those of you that don't know who I am, and thank you very much, CF Live, for the raid. My name is Lord Hey Fixer. Everyone just calls me Fix or Fixer. And this is a special edition of Fixer's Heavy Metal History. We have been doing 25 episodes of this since May, once a week, where we've been exploring the French Revolution, and that's on pause until after the holidays because, yeah, there's a lot of detail there. And there's some detail here tonight.
Ho, ho.
I don't want to see you
You're welcome,
here anymore.
Gilly.
Eat it. Vous me connaissez, monsieur? Eat it, Buddy.
That guy Napoleon's about to join that whole conversation in the French Revolution, but I like history. So what I decided to do tonight was to give a little history about...
Yes, I'm excited.
Here it comes. Everybody doesn't have to take notes, and so it's going to be chaos in here this evening. But give you a little bit of history about why do we celebrate... Why do we celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December? Along with where does Santa come from? And one of the most amazing outpourings of human decency in history that was centered around this holiday. So, there's no quiz tonight. We usually have a quiz. There's a leaderboard that'll pop up here every time during the episode tonight. It's more involved than Saint Nick. You guys always try to guess ahead, like I'm going to give you the answer before I get there. Like I'm going to say, hold on, let me go 6 pages down in my outline and let's go to that section first. It's not going to happen. Also, very much thanks to Cat Food the Band, which is CF Live, Mr. Land Diggity, and Ben, who doesn't stream and hates me, therefore, whatever. Thank you very much for letting me use your music tonight for the intro and for our BRB screen. There will be another Christmas song during our break. Well, Christmas as the idea of having a dressed-up man in a red suit doesn't rely on anything upon religion at all. But we'll get there. I've always loved that I have 2 Christmases. You have an Orthodox Christmas to celebrate as well, Nalhurt? Into the new year? But anyway, let's get into the whole... See, I know stuff. It's crazy. I had no notes on that at all. And one of the things we're going to do tonight is there's going to be a whole section in here about that event of human decency. And I know that you guys like when I do things from memory. So my outline for this show is only 6 pages. That's going to cover basically the left half of the screen. The right half of the screen is 5 bullet points to trigger me on specific things I have to say, and the rest of it is all from here, because you guys seem to think that's some kind of weird feat or something. So anyway, let's get into it. Where does Christmas come from? For as long as any of us can remember, the holiday of Christmas, not the religious observance, but the season of Christmas, has been, I do memorize things. It's been celebrated about the 25th of December. By the way, speaking chat, because Eddie's giving out presents tonight, and if you don't talk, there's no chance that you're going to get a present. But we've all kind of celebrated this notion of the Christmas holiday season around the 25th of December. And regardless of your religious convictions or beliefs, this day in December defines the whole month of December in Western culture. And I'm not a religious guy at all. I don't subscribe to any religion that's defined by dogma or anything like that. But I still celebrate Christmas. And I celebrate it because of what the season means to me. And that's why understanding where it comes from is kind of important to me. Presents. No, Eddie did not find your keys. So Christmas at its core is obviously the Christian observance of the birth of Jesus Christ. But it also serves as a commercial engine for a more secular gift-giving season centered around the concept of Santa Claus, as well as just a basic season of good tidings and benevolence toward others. And that's something I try to do all the time. I try to be decent all the time, but if people need a season, so be it. But the concept of Christmas has inspired these remarkable outpourings of kindness and humanity as well throughout history, which stand in general dark contrast to basic human nature over the centuries. There's going to be something later on tonight. I am decent via frequent trolling. That is very true, Gilly, but I think my friends will tell you that if I am not joking with you and trying to make you laugh through that kind of trolling, that I'm not your friend, because I don't talk to people I don't like. So how does Christmas get to become December 25th? How do we arrive at December 25th as the date of Jesus' birth, given there's no mention of a date in the Bible, right? And everyone's going to be quick to do their snapshot analysis of, well, it's because of pagan holidays and the winter solstice. So sure, but why? There's no mention of it in the Bible. I've read the entire Bible because I like to be educated on things I speak about. I've read every major Western religious text because I like to be educated on these things. But there's nowhere in the 4 published Gospels, nowhere in the Gnostic Gospels, which are those, Gospels that the Vatican doesn't want out there. Nowhere in any of these documents does it say, this is the day Jesus Christ was born. The Jewish calendar, well, let's step back one. None of this date's not specified. And in the Jewish world at the time of Jesus Christ's birth, and Jesus Christ, the man, regardless of what you believe, is a person. He existed. Nowhere in the Jewish world, which was operating under the Julian calendar at the time, which was implemented by Julius Caesar, and then further tinkered with by Augustus and Tiberius, his immediate imperial successors, nowhere does it appear to reference any date to the Julian calendar. Nor does it reference the Jewish calendar. And again, that Jewish calendar had not been outlawed at the time. It gets outlawed a little bit later in Roman history. Theologists believe he was born in April sometime. Yeah, it's one of those things where you can believe kind of what you want to believe about nailing down a real date, but there's no evidence of it, right? There's no birth record of it. We didn't get to the idea of lodging date of birth records with religious institutions until the Dark Ages. When someone was baptized, they'd also have to basically have it written down by their church that this is the day they were born on. That doesn't come around for, several centuries. Wasn't it Christians usurping a pagan holiday? We're going to get there, Arky. Everyone wants to, that's the quick shot summary. It wasn't Christians, but which Christians? And how did we get there? And it's not as quick as, well, let's just pick a random pagan holiday off the calendar. There's a reason why it's this pagan holiday. And it's not as simple as, oh, that's the solstice. Again, we're going to get there. That's the whole first half of this thing tonight. So again, the Jewish calendar was not outlawed by Rome. And again, no point in the Gospels or any of the Gnostic Gospels is there a date assigned to the birth of Jesus. Isn't there a discrepancy in calendars because of Romans? Again, everybody wants to joke. Yes, Herc, there is that. And I'm definitely going to cover that tonight. So the 25th of December seems to... No, you're fine. You're fine. I kind of put an outline there so you guys can kind of see where I'm going, but that's fine. No, you can ask questions. I'm just going to say the armchair quarterbacking on I think I know the abstract. The only person who probably really knows in here is Diggity's referenced some of the same source material I have in some of just his educational, having fun listening to podcast stuff. But the 25th of December seems to be pretty arbitrary on face value, right? Why is it this day? And the Romans absolutely have something to do with this because they were the people in charge of the known world, including Judea, which was a Roman province, at 0 AD when Jesus was supposedly born. But in order to land there, right, in order to get to the point that we go, well, the Romans did it, we have to kind of understand, even in a pre-antiquity state, before the Greeks and the Romans, why this is significant, why the end of December is significant. We have to go to astronomy, right? And everyone's going to go, the equinox. Yep, we're going to talk about the winter solstice. Because for as long as there has been civilization, there have been holidays and festivals, right? Everyone has always looked for an excuse to take some time off, blow off steam, have a party, get drunk, and not do their job. For as long as there's ever been anything. Days of the week where work was put aside in honor of this god or that god to celebrate this or that seasonal transition were the root of a lot of the holidays that we know. The particulars of all this change over time. But they're constants. They're constants in historical records going back into thousands of years BC that just pop up over and over again. And not just in Western civilization. You can go into Eastern cultures and find this as well. Some sort of holiday is always, or festival, for example, is found at the beginning of spring in association with the return of life from a long dormant winter. And we have to put ourselves in the mindset that winter sucked before electricity, pretty much, right? Before you could electrically heat your home or you had gas lines coming in your home, winter sucked. And it was a hunker down and make it through type of season. We've talked about this during the French Revolution, especially, when we talked about the prices of firewood and things like that, where literally keeping your home warm was a struggle. Having enough food during the winter was a struggle. Cities fall because they don't have enough food brought in for the winter. And you don't grow crops in the winter. So winter for us in the modern world it's inconvenient, for those of you that don't like the cold, and I love the cold. But it's like, I don't want to be cold, I'll just go into my nice warm house. It's not how this winter was, take it back maybe 150 years. That point back further in history, it sucked. So there's always been some sort of celebration around springtime, because the light is finally ebbed enough to where life can return. And in agricultural societies, there has always been some manner of harvest festival, right, in the autumn, with communities feasting on this bounty that just came in before they decide what they've got to stockpile to get through that winter. And of course, back to the earliest tribes of mankind, there has been some sort of midwinter, and the term midwinter is misleading, but midwinter festival or holiday, which no matter the rituals or traditions, was among the most popular of all of these societies that had this midwinter festival. And midwinter festivals usually happen in December, when winter actually starts. And while there's no measurement historically for emotion, you can surmise that one of the reasons that these midwinter festivals were omnipresent in pretty much every culture that we can find a record for, and omni-loved in the writings that we can find for these cultures, is the fact that it simply sits in the middle of winter. It's cold and dark. And there's literally been nothing to do for a couple of months, right? The harvest is in, and the nights are getting longer, and it's getting colder. So people haven't been doing much for a couple of months. And it's going to be cold and dark for a few months to come, though that light is going to get a little bit more every day. So these festivals that occur in December, have historically broken that cold and dark monotony in half, and served as a kind of you're halfway there celebration of the winter season, which was really a killer. It was a killer emotionally, it was a killer physically to people. And if societies weren't prepared. They didn't make it through it. So without some kind of pleasant break in the middle of the cold and the bleak and the lack of fields to till, people were likely to despair, and communities started to gather around fires and hold week-long feasts. While at the same time also starting to, depending on the holiday or festival that each individual society had, some of them started to exchange gifts with each other. Just small tokens to say, I'm glad you're here, or type of interconnected sense of community idea. These days in Western society, December is marked by an explosion of colored lights in homes, right? Our modern day, these days in Western society, we see Christmas lights go up. We see Christmas trees go up. We see as much lighting as really people...
Excellent!
Yes, excellent. As much lighting as possible really fly up. And this might be, and I really do believe it is, the same basic psychological reaction to a desire to break up that long night that we all have. We have these extended periods of night, for around 3 to 4 months. And I really feel like the desire to break up the monotony is our modern day expression through the idea of putting up all the lights. It's going to be cold. It's going to be great. It's going to last the rest of your life. I like dark at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So,
Ho. Ho.
Fish again gets a present.
Ho.
So there was always a harsh undercut, right? In societies that lived like on the razor's edge of survival and extinction, on the notion of how much food did they brought in and would it be enough? How much heating would they brought in and would it be enough? Winter was always this time of famine. Any excess livestock, so livestock that you didn't need the following year, to again have it produce offspring and complete the cycle to the next winter. Any excess livestock these societies didn't need had to be killed off before the truly hard months hit, January and February to us. So this culling, the meat from this livestock culling could be preserved. But there was no reason to keep around the extra mouths of all these animals over a period of serious strain on food stores in these societies. So you had the autumn harvest of what was being tilled and grown, but you also had like a winter slaughter almost of animals that were excess. And accompanying this slaughter of animals in the wintertime and the boon of food it produced at the time were these communal feasts, which also served as kind of a last blowout, right? Here we are, the midpoint of midwinter. But we know the next couple of months are the worst part. And we're going to have one last party because all this stuff is freshly cut before we all really shut the doors and settle in for a few months of snow and freezing and just holding on. But winter slaughter, Nordic death metal band, probably. Freezers are a matter of, building a house outside, it'll be cold enough to freeze it on its own. And salting and preserving meat evolves more into the antiquity period. Thanks for the follow, Lethos78. Welcome into a Christmas special or holiday special for Fixer's Heavy Metal History. But this midwinter partying, right, for its own sake, is only, of course, part of the story. It sets up why initially, way back, why societies decided to have some sort of festival, around the notion of midwinter, as what we understand to be late December. But just as humans have always been, finding excuses to find holidays, we've also had a strange fixation with astronomy. Humans have always loved and endeavored to find meaning from what's in the sky. And it didn't take long for early astronomers, which basically were just sky observers, who also doubled as early priests and shamans to their societies, to note that there were cyclical patterns in the movement of celestial objects, and then attach significance to a few of the more noteworthy ones. Thank you very much, motorcycle, for driving past my window. they watched these shamans, these priests, these astronomers, they watched as the days grew longer and longer during the summer until the daytime reached some kind of maximum length and then began to shorten. Later, there was a day when the daytime and the night were the same length. And then as winter came, that night began to last longer than the day until night reached a peak maximum length and then contracted back to a day and night of equal length. People began to wrap all sort of religious and philosophical meaning to these days, which we now call the summer solstice, the autumnal equinox, the winter solstice, and the vernal equinox. They had no idea about solar systems or tilted axis or spheres floating in space influenced by gravitational pull of a massive fission engine at its center, but they knew something was up, that there was a cycle that was observable, and they wanted to attach meaning to it. So these early astronomer priests surrounded these days that were meaningful in the celestial rotation with festivals. See, also Easter. Yes, we're going to get to that as well, because that's actually one of the reasons why Christmas gets its date jacked up, is Easter. So if humans did not need a reason to party in the winter due to the bleak and cold and remember to clonk that follow button, bounty of the last livestock harvest in the first place, it certainly wasn't going to bother anyone that now they were being given a reason to do so by their priests, shamans, or wise men. Hey, there's a reason why we should also have a celebration here, because this is the longest night, and we should celebrate that it is over, because we know that this now means that we will see more and more light until life reconquers the darkness in the springtime. They didn't invent anything, right? Well, let me go back a little bit. Here, these astronomer priests were telling the general people that darkness, had been spreading for 6 months and slowly, taking over and dragging down the spirits of most. It reached its maximum effect. Now the light would be ascendant, and the worst, was kind of behind them, a little bit kind of behind them. That each day would get a little bit brighter and, in general, a little bit warmer. Now, it wouldn't be a little bit warmer immediately in the northern hemisphere, at least, because it would be a little bit colder for a couple of months, but the sun would start to become ascendant again because of the aforementioned tilted axis thing. But it's an easy thing to sell, right? If you're the astronomer priest, probably also pretty high up in terms of power and position in your tribe or small early civilization, to say, I was right again, because eventually spring got here. So it was easy to create this midwinter festival, and they began to occur on or around the winter solstice, just as spring festivals of life began to hinge on the vernal equinox in the springtime. I might be interested in the mechanism of, you'll have to put that into a DM for me, because there's no way I'll remember that after the show, Sturm. But the Romans get to set the day. So the upper image on the whiteboard tonight is just showing you, how the solstice and everything looks from the position of the axis tilting to the sun. But now we're going to get into the Roman Empire. Well, the Roman Republic. For those of you that are unaware, the Roman Empire was not always an empire. Right? It did not become an empire until after Julius Caesar. He technically maybe be looked at as the initiator of the imperium, but Caesar Augustus was the first emperor of Rome. But he's, that's just before 0 AD.
Ho, ho, ho.
But for all this time, for hundreds of years before, basically around the time of the birth of Christ, Rome was a republic. The same basic idea of a republic that, the United States is, as broken as it is. But by the time the Romans initially came along, there was already a rich tradition of festivities surrounding the winter solstice. So the Romans didn't invent anything, right? They didn't invent anything, but they did have their own holiday calendar and their own pantheon of gods. And that becomes the conduit for how these celebrations pass into our own modern era. Because, again, for those of you that have kind of paid attention to the French Revolution, you can see thinkers in the late 18th century heavily influenced by the Romans, right? And we are still heavily influenced by the Romans. It was an empire that lasted a long time. You're talking, nearly 1,000 years. And when a culture is that dominant for that long, they have ripple effects that go out into everything.
No
way that whether you know it or not. So let's start here. A long-standing Roman tradition dating back to the early days of the Roman Republic was called Saturnalia. Saturn, Saturn, Alia. It was a feast commemorating the founding of the temple of Saturn, who was the Roman god of agriculture. It was the celebration of the anniversary of the completion of the temple of Saturn in Rome. Roman 500 BC, it was just another city in Italy. There were, cities 12 miles away that were just as impressive as Rome. But Saturnalia is where how we got here really catches its feet for the first time. And I actually say to people, who know history, happy Saturnalia, because they know what I'm talking about. Kronos, for those who follow Greek mythology. Kronos is the god of time, isn't he? Let's go confirm that real quick, because I don't want there to be a misnomer about that. Greek god of agriculture. That would be Demeter. Daughter of Cronus, but not Cronus. And Cronus would be spelled Cronus. Demeter would be the Greek parallel to Saturn. But let's stay focused on the Romans, because the Greeks didn't have much to do with this. The Greek gods influenced the Roman gods because the Romans were always kind of in a competition with Athens. The Romans actually predate or forged the founding of their own city and their own republic to be just a little bit ahead of the Greeks, even though, they just did it. They wrote it down. They forged their own founding documents so they could say, we were a democracy before Greece was. So that's why there's that huge tie between Roman and Greek gods, by the way. The Romans and the Greeks were always in this little competition in the few centuries before, the final centuries BC. Anyway, back to the point. The first celebration of Saturnalia took place around December 17th, and that's reckoned to the Gregorian calendar. And every date that I'm mentioning here tonight is reckoned to the Gregorian calendar. And we're going to get into why that's different later. But the Gregorian calendar is what we use today. The first celebration of Saturnalia in Rome took place on December 17th, but as time passed, the Feast of Saturnalia grew from being a single day to being a week-long thing. So December 17th through the dawn of the 24th of December, reckoned to our modern calendar, would be the time frame in question here as we talk about Saturnalia. By the Middle Imperial period, so that's Middle Imperial Rome, that's a 150 to 300 Christian era, so that's, 650 to 800 years after Saturnalia starts, the Roman Empire had the festival extended as far out and beyond the date of our concern here, which is December 25th. Saturnalia was that winter festival, and as I said earlier, the winter festivals were super popular. In every culture we have documents and can infer that from. Saturnalia was by far the most popular of Roman. Thank you very much, Feast. The personification of time and the king of the Titans are both named Cronus, or Cronus, and are often confused or conflated. Vile Dust, welcome in. Thank you very much, Feast. So yeah, Cronus with a K is for sure a Titan, and the father of Zeus. Cronus with a Cronus, that last one is the father of Demeter. But thank you very much for adding 4 spellings of a Greek god into chat, Fish. But I know I can pick out for sure what a couple of those are. But anyway, Saturn, parallel to Demeter, Demeter, daughter of Cronus in Greek mythology, back to Saturnalia. Again, Saturnalia in Rome celebrated the founding of the... Thank you for the follow, Zetices. I hopefully pronounced that correctly. I never hear anyone say it right in anyone's stream. Thank you very much for the follow. So Saturnalia, again, the most popular Roman holiday festival based in their original, or what we know to be their original Roman pantheon of gods. Again, it was that, winter festival. The personification of time is considered to be a primordial being. Some consider him older than Gaia, which is the goddess of what is the planet, rather than one of her children, aka the Titans. Yes. Time, I could do a whole other thing on that one. Time as a concept of divinity. Did you know that the Romans also had a god of borders, where one of the reasons that the Romans expanded as much as they did is because they believed it was divinely influenced by their god of borders, which is why when an emperor here or there would give up territory, it was seen as a sacrilege, because not even Jupiter, who is the parallel to Zeus, not even Jupiter could move those borders. Only the god of borders could. So I'm going to say this one more time so we get back on track. Saturnalia was by far the most Roman holiday. It was that winter festival. It came with large public feasts. It occurred from the 17th of December to the 25th of December, reckoned to the Gregorian calendar beyond.
Ho, ho, ho.
And it came with a complete abandonment of traditional morality. And Roman morality in the 500 to basically 50 BC era was a big deal. Roman virtue was a big deal. But during the Feast of Saturnalia, gambling was encouraged, where the rest of the year it was really frowned upon. And it wasn't encouraged just for citizens, but for slaves as well. And the Roman economic system is increasingly built on slavery well into the Imperium. Slaves actually got treated like, real people for the duration of the festival. And in many cases, role reversal games were held within households where the slaves took the job as master for a week, and the masters became, kind of the servants. And Roman citizens during Saturnalia delighted in the novelty of being told by their slaves to go serve food and to run errands. And the slaves obviously enjoyed this brief moment on the couch, as they humorously ordered their masters about, knowing full well that a week later they had to make sure they weren't too much of a jerk about it. So as for its connection to Christmas, Saturnalia was also accompanied by gift giving and the hanging of pine bow decorations inside the home, and singing in the streets, which corresponds to our, more modern caroling. On that point, Gilly, those who mistreated their slaves in Rome were ostracized. Don't compare Roman slavery with Western slavery of the Atlantic slave triangle. They're completely different ideas. Roman slaves were generally treated pretty well because slaves they were presented as look how wealthy I am. I have 6 slaves. I have a slave that helps me put my left shoe on and a different one that helps me put my right shoe on. Mistreating slaves in Rome was bad news for someone who did it. But again, to the point, Romans, during Saturnalia, hung pine bows. Kind of something we do now. They sang in the streets, which corresponds to our caroling. But the Romans did do the whole singing in the streets thing while they were really drunk and not wearing very much clothing at all, which we should probably be thankful is something that didn't carry over from Saturnalia into our modern sensibilities of Christmas caroling. Slaves within cities throughout time had a slightly better deal than those in the burbs, except in Rome. Field slaves that worked the land were also treated pretty well. It really took a sadistic owner to mistreat slaves in Rome, and again, those who did so were ostracized from society life, the life of the aristocrats, where they would gather and have these feasts and hang out in each other's homes. If you mistreated your slaves, you weren't invited to that stuff. And that was the lane to political power. So, again, it was just frame it differently in terms of what you understand to be, especially the American historical concept of slavery in the South and Roman times, because slaves were very differently treated in Rome. So for all of its importance, an obvious similarities to our celebration of Christmas, Saturnalia is not the true reason that Christmas is on December 25th. But it does set up that reason. Because this festival, Saturnalia, gets co-opted. Believe it or not. And it doesn't get co-opted directly by the Christians. And everyone's right. Yeah, there's pagan holidays out there that get co-opted by the Christians, and that's why Christmas is on the around the 25th. That's all right. But Saturnalia gets co-opted by something else first. We're going to talk about what that something else first is after a quick break. Make sure you get up, go to the bathroom, stretch your legs. I know we've only going 35 minutes in terms of, actual talking time, but enjoy Cat Food the Band. I'm going to stand up and stretch my legs as well. I'll be right back. We'll talk about what that feast is that took over or co-opted Saturnalia. And the Romans did it to themselves.
Let's all hop in our cat food mobile and go for a sleigh ride.
Gentlemen, we're history.
Yeah, it's lovely weather for a sleigh ride with you. Yeah, it's lovely weather for a sleigh ride with you. And there's not much else to do. So it's lovely weather for a sleigh ride with you. It's all about the jingling. Listen. Yeah, it's lovely weather for a sleigh ride with me. Come on. Yeah, it's lovely weather for a sleigh ride with me. So grab your coat and a beer or three, 'cause it's lovely weather for a sleigh ride with me. Well, it's lovely weather to stream some cat food. Yeah. Well, it's lovely weather to stream some cat food. With holiday cheer coming out the wazoo. It's lovely weather to stream some cat food.
Ben doesn't hate me. Okay. The joke there is that the first time I engaged with Ben on CF stream, I was doing my normal thing. I was trolling people. And Ben's his first reaction was, wow, that guy's a jerk. So it's been a joke since then. That's why it's up there. So, hopefully you're back. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. For those of you, again, that don't know me here on Twitch, I'm Lord iFixer. Every bit, every sub that I get, I take the taxes that I have to pay on that off, and I give the rest of it to disabled American veterans. During that BRB screen, you saw that we've done amazing work for disabled American veterans this year and for Stop Soldier Suicide. This community is amazing. And we raised, $3,200 for Stop Soldier Suicide in a month, and we've crossed over the $2,000 for DAV this year just through your subs, which is nuts. So I don't make money doing this. I enjoy history. I enjoy the community. The community wanted me. Manny, thank you for the 5 guest subs, even though it's not going to play because I told him to figure that out. Thank you very much. That's Fletch, Poe, H-Charms, J4, and K's all get a sub. Enjoy those. But I don't make a dime off it. And, so that's why we do what we do here. The Romans knew when taking away people's holidays by bringing new culture, they must be replaced with new ones. Yep, we're getting there, Sturm. That's a great list of people. It's not so much that the Romans knew, but that the early Christian church knew it. But we'll get to that. We're gonna get there. But first, Saturnalia. This festival, it occurred in the wintertime for about a week or so, when people ran naked, drunk in the streets, singing, and hung pine boughs in their homes, celebrated the founding of the Temple of Saturn, which is that nice carving of the guy with a scythe in the middle of the left-hand side of the screen. But again, Saturnalia is not the real reason that Christmas is on December 25th. That honor actually goes to a Syrian feast, Syrian feast, called Sol Invictus, or the Feast of the Undying, or sometimes translated as Unconquered Sun. Now, on the left side of your screen, in the middle, there's a little disc-looking thing, and you can see this is a Roman imperial disc of Sol Invictus. You can see the sun crown coming off it. You look at the bottom at Aurelian. That's not Marcus Aurelius, by the way. It's a different Roman emperor named Aurelian. You can see that he's wearing a sun crown. In the middle to late Imperium, about 150 to 450 of the Christian era, AD, I say CE, the Romans began to adopt and follow the worship of Eastern sun cults. When I say Eastern, there was, at this point in history for the Romans, there was a Western Empire, which was basically Italy and Gaul, which is France, and Britannia, and Spain, and North Africa. And then there was the Eastern Empire, which is like Egypt, Judea, Syria, a lot of the territory of Macedonia, and the Greek states that they had taken over. All that's to the east, but we're talking about the east, like out in Syria, out in Judea, what we today would call the Near East, or potentially the Middle East. The extreme eastern edge of the Roman Empire was actually seen by many to be infectious and against the principles of Roman virtue, but these sun cults started to work their way into Roman culture. And if we're going to talk about sun gods, we're going to, obviously make the winter solstice is going to be a big deal in there. Sol Invictus honored the sun god Sol for holding fast against the encroaching darkness that had been coming at him since summer, and celebrated the day he turned the tables on his eternal enemy, night, and began to retake the sky from him. The Syrian-born, believe it or not, the Syrian-born Roman Emperor Elagabalus, who's one of those bad emperors for a lot of reasons. He's up there with Commodus and Nero and a bunch of other really horrible emperors. But one of the big influential things that Elagabalus did, and he's on the bottom row, he's the bust statue down there. That's Elagabalus. Elagabalus introduced the Romans to this Feast of the Unconquered Sun, or the Undying Sun, Sol Invictus, around 220 of the Christian era. And, as emperor, he held a feast recognizing Sol Invictus on what we now know to be the 25th of December, which, according to the Roman calendar at the time, was the winter solstice. Was he 16, or are you thinking of a different era? He was young. You're in the ballpark. He was a young kid when he came along. He was absolutely anti-Roman when he became emperor. He was the antithesis of what a Roman was at the time. But again, he starts to have this Feast of Sol Invictus every year on December 25th, because at the time, that was the winter solstice. Because when Julius Caesar created the Julian calendar, he miscalculated the amount of time necessary to get the leap in, right? The leap year every 4 years. And so we're talking 270 years roughly since Julius Caesar created and implemented that calendar for Rome. That's a lot of drift. And because of that drift, the 21st in our reckoning, what we understand to be the solstice, actually had drifted to the Roman. Their 21st is our 25th today. It didn't get fixed until Pope Gregory XIII came along and corrected it all again for all the leap years that were basically messed up for about 1600 years. 50 years later, after Elagabalus had come and introduced Sol Invictus and kind of got the train going, and Elagabalus didn't last that long as an emperor because the bad ones never do, the Emperor Aurelian, whose patron god was Sol, one of the various different sun gods hanging around in all the different cults at the time, he popularized the feast, and he took it empire-wide. He didn't just do it in Rome. He kind of said, this is a feast everywhere. Well, somebody was bad at math. It comes down to, it's really hard to get it right without the right instrumentation. And, I mean, he was 0.75 days off for a year. And that's not bad for the instrumentation available at the time. Plus, Julius Caesar got it wrong, but Augustus made it worse, and the Nicene Council made it worse.
Ho, ho, ho.
So again, 50 years later, Aurelian, whose patron god was Sol, took it from what Elagabalus had done. You'd be surprised, Gilly, because what happens when Rome falls, when the Dark Ages hit, and probably people aren't using calendars too much anymore. They've probably reverted much further back to the notion of just following when it gets cold, when it gets warm, and when it gets cold again. You're thinking that everyone's got a desk calendar or a wall calendar that says, oh yeah, today is this day. It's not how it was. You know, there was a large calendar in the Forum in Rome where there were these gold pieces that were changed at sunrise every day that indicated what day it was. But people didn't have a local, in their home, way to reckon the date. They were dependent upon the government. Well, when there is no government anymore, they're not keeping track of the day like that. And the Dark Ages are that. Pretty sure the far side desk calendars are prehistoric. Yeah, time.windows.com has been around for a long time. Not that long, though. I'm glad you guys are having fun with the concept. But again, Aurelian, I used this specific depiction of him at the bottom because he has the sun crown. He was big into the whole idea of the sun god Sol, and so he takes Sol Invictus empire-wide. He did so because he was Pontifex Maximus for all Romans. And Pontifex Maximus is the head priest of Rome, right? And the idea of Pontifex Maximus goes back to the founding of the Republic, even going back to the era of the Seven Kings before there was a Republic in Rome. Pontifex Maximus is the top-notch head priest of Rome. Well, guess what? The term pontiff that is used by the Pope today derives from he's the head priest of Rome. He's the Pontifex Maximus of Rome. He's not.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
He's not the Pontifex Maximus of the old Roman gods, nor is he the Pontifex Maximus of the sun cult of Sol Invictus. He's the Pontifex Maximus of the Christian Church. But the term pontiff derives from the idea of this Pontifex Maximus office. It is that office. That's where that title for the Pope comes from. I can't think of Wile E. Coyote. Okay, so 20 years after Aurelian, right? The Emperor Constantine, which is a name that hopefully rings some bells for people, he came along, and with him came Christianity as the state religion of the Roman Empire. I'm sure the church seems to tell you different, but the Julius Caesar was actually Pontifex Maximus of Rome as well. It was his first major office on his path of what is called the cursus honorum, which is all the major offices to becoming consul or leader of Rome. But the Pontifex Maximus was a lifetime appointment for whoever it was in Rome at the time. Eventually, the power of Pontifex Maximus became invested in the imperator, or emperor, because there was no term emperor in Rome either. Imperator means has the power over life and death of all people in the empire. Anyway, it's a little sidebar there, but that's where pontiff comes from. Anyway, Constantine comes along 20 years after Aurelian, had hung up his shingle or been done as emperor. Constantine was a completely different force in the Roman Empire. He comes out of Britannia, modern day Great Britain. That's where he kind of was governor and powerful. But he was seized with either a mystical vision of Christ or perhaps the more practical understanding that the Christian bureaucrats at the time were the only people he could really trust with the imperial treasury, Constantine does the first major thing. He officially ends persecution of the Christians. And that had been kind of an on-again, off-again thing going back to before Hadrian, to where the Jews in Judea had risen up in revolt because they refused to swear, fealty to the large pantheon of Roman gods, which included the emperors at that point. The emperors sacked the temple in Jerusalem. They burned the city down at one point. They had been going at each other for a long time. And Constantine ends all of that for good. And then on his deathbed, Constantine converts to Christianity, the first Roman emperor to do so. And at the same time, because he was emperor, he also decreed that the empire would convert to Christianity. So you're talking, 220 for Elagabalus, 50 years later for Aurelian, that's 270, and then you're 300 AD, roughly, is when this is all going down. In the beginning of the Christian Roman era, around 300 CE, the leaders of the Christian church attempted to stamp out. This is where, I think it was Sturm or Herc was saying it earlier, they attempted to stamp out the old pagan holidays of both Sol Invictus and Saturnalia, which are both still around, but they ran into a huge level of resistance. And these are the early, Roman Catholic Church leaders at this point. They tried to stamp out the old pagan holidays, and the Romans and the rest of the empire were like, well, no, we like that holiday. Why would you try to take that away from us? We understand the empire's converted to Christianity, but there's a slow process to get that large of a group of people to convert their religion. The Romans continued to follow their old holiday calendar, and they held fast in particular to the Feast of Sol Invictus. And the elders of the church, of the early Roman Catholic Church, realized they were fighting a losing battle. And so they changed their approach. And instead of trying to stamp out all of the old holidays, they merely co-opted them and refashioned them as Christian holidays. So they're co-opting at the time in their own calendar reckoning, the 25th of December, which they thought was the winter solstice, as the birthday of Christ. The first official connections between what we now know today to be Christmas and December 25th, remember, that's the solstice in the eyes of the Romans at the time, began around 330 to 350 of the Christian era. Jesus is often depicted in art from this time period with a radiating solar crown.
Ho, ho, ho.
And it was often used interchangeably, this radiating solar crown, with the various pagan solar deities. The citizen body took what they were seeing and going, oh, look, Jesus, the savior of Christianity, has a radiating solar crown, and Sol Invictus does too. And that began the slow transition. No, Berlin, they didn't build their first major scene then. That began the slow transition of the empire to adopting what was the Feast of Sol Invictus on the incorrect date of the solstice at the 25th of December to the birth date of Jesus Christ on the 25th of December. By 400 Christian era, December 25th was firmly established by the Romans and soon to be Byzantines in Constantinople. And that's the Eastern Roman Empire. It's going to fracture off when Rome falls. It had become cemented as the celebration of the birth of Jesus, and all mention of the old gods was gone in about 50 years. So Sol Invictus, Saturn, all of them, they're gone within 50 years because the Roman Catholic Church in those early days was pretty ruthless, to be quite honest. As the Western Roman Empire fell, and again, that's, kind of like draw a line between Greece and Rome, or Greece and Italy. Everything to the west would be the Western Empire, basically. As the Western Roman Empire fell, it took with it the last vestiges of Greco-Roman paganism. So the whole idea of, now it's a good segue, Cronus and Demeter and Saturn and Jupiter, that just goes away. Because the major place where there was any vestiges of it left fell. And it fell to, a different sort of pagan who had invaded them and toppled them. But they were the last bulwark of Greco-Roman, not just paganism, but Greco-Roman civilization. The Byzantines were becoming their own thing in the East at that point. And the Byzantines were carrying forward the idea that Christmas was on the 25th, that Jesus Christ was born on that day. And so, Yesway, despite the many past claims by other deities, the December 25th, the winter solstice, and the winter solstice, it was just now a date that was for Jesus and Jesus alone across what is effectively Europe to the Middle East. And though the importance of Christmas as a holiday itself, like how important is the birth date of Jesus, civically, secularly, and also religiously, how important is it? It's waxed and waned over the years. It had a major resurgence in the 19th century. It's always been considered the birth date of Jesus from basically 400 AD CE to today. And it dominates the Christian holiday calendar today. And it dominates the civic holiday calendar today. We hit Christmas, and like I said, the jump. Regardless of your religious convictions, many of us celebrate the holiday because of what it represents beyond religion at this point. So there you go. When you sit down around, the holidays this year with whomever you're sitting with, and every year to exchange gifts, just bear in mind that the day we're doing it on is tied back to the worship of Sol Invictus, which caught on in Rome due to its convenient timing with the original, festival of Saturnalia. And the date's wrong because Pope Gregory XIII would come along in the 16th century, in 1582 to be exact, and he would issue a papal bull edict to correct the mathematical errors in Julius Caesar's original Julian calendar and the incorrect adjustments to it by Augustus and the Nicene Council in order to align, thank you, number 98, the calculations of Easter based off the vernal equinox with which within the Julian calendar were simply occurring too early in the year due to the mathematical errors that had drifted across the centuries as they got back to recognizing that calendar as maybe what they should be using again as they came out of the Dark Ages. So the date of Christmas gets stuck on the 25th, but the solstice gets shifted back to the 21st correctly so that Easter can be right. And that's why there's a 4-day difference. Otherwise, it was originally celebrated on what the Romans were believing to be the winter solstice. And there you go. That's why December 25th is Christmas. It's not because it was a date that was co-opted from northern paganism or any other crap you maybe have heard. It wasn't adapted from, Celts or anything like that. It was the Roman wrong calendar and the sequence of adaptation of Roman holidays into the Constantinople era of the Roman Empire when it became a Christian empire. And then not for 1600 years, well, more like 1100 years really after it had been set on the 25th, did they fix it in the papacy by Pope Gregory XIII. Yeah, first Sunday after the first moon of after the vernal equinox. Easter has nothing to do with astrology. So what about Santa Claus? What about this guy? About jolly old Saint Nick, as everyone calls him at times. Why is Santa Santa? Where does that come from? Well, the legend of Santa Claus can be tracked back hundreds of years, many hundreds of years, to a monk named St. Nicholas. Duh! As everyone kind of assumed. Yeah, this is St. Nick out there. But it's believed that Nicholas... Are you going to cover crumbs as well? No. It's believed that Nicholas, the man who would become St. Nicholas, was born sometime around 280 AD in Patara, which is near Myra in modern-day Turkey. So, not in the Roman Empire proper, but there actually probably was in the Roman Empire at a specific time, Krampus. Not talking about that either. St. Nicholas, and this is all a little apocryphal because the records are church records, and they are what they are. But he was admired for his piety and kindness. It is said that he gave away all of his inherited wealth and traveled the countryside helping the poor and sick, because that's how you become a saint. One of the best known St. Nicholas stories of his era contemporarily is the time he saved 3 poor sisters from being sold into slavery or prostitution by their father, which was something that could be done back then, because he provided them with enough money to be a dowry so that they could effectively hand that over to a would-be husband and get married.
Ho, ho, ho.
So St. Nick's major story from his contemporary story is that he was really generous, and he saved 3 daughters from being sold into slavery because he effectively paid their dowries for them. And over the years, St. Nicholas, his popularity spread, and he became known as a protector of children and sailors for some reason. His feast day is celebrated on the anniversary of his death, December 6th, so it slips into that month that we're concerned about for the holiday season. That's in the title, Children and Sailors for some reason. Yeah, it literally says that on the Catholic Church, their list of, he's the Church of Children and Sailors for some reason. St. Nick. But his feast day, again, celebrated on the 6th of December. It's traditionally considered a lucky day to get married on or make significant purchases on. And by the Renaissance, so 14th, 15th century, St. Nick was the most popular saint in Europe. And even after the Protestant Reformation, which is when the Protestant sects of Christianity break off from the Catholic Church because they didn't want to pay to, do confession and stuff. When the Protestant Reformation occurs, veneration of the saints becomes discouraged in Protestant communities. St. Nick's still a well-liked guy. He managed to maintain a massively popular and positive reputation in Holland or the Netherlands. St. Nick makes his first inroads into American popular culture towards the ends of the 18th century. In December 1773 and again in 1774, so 2 years before the Declaration of Independence, a New York newspaper reported that groups of Dutch families had gathered to honor St. Nick on the anniversary of his death. So it's in the paper in New York that here's these Dutch families, because that's where he had a huge following in Europe. They had gathered to celebrate the feast day of St. Nick, celebrate the patron saint of children and sailors. The name Santa Claus itself evolves from St. Nick's Dutch nickname, Sinterklaas, Sinterklaas, a shortened form of Sint Nicolaas, which is Dutch for St. Nicholas. In 1804, a man named John Pintard, who is a member of the New York Historical Society, distributed wood cuttings at the annual society meeting around Christmas time. So the thing that's really important about John Pintard, so we're talking, there's been a little bit of recognition of St. Nick in New York for about 20 years or so, 30 years. Pintard distributes these wood cuttings, and the background of these wood cuttings is the now familiar Santa Claus imagery, which is the stockings filled with toys and, the fireplace and things like that. That holiday scene that we all kind of think of when we think of Santa Claus and the secular idea of Christmas, that originates from John Pintard's wood cuttings in 1804. In 1809, 5 years later, Washington Irving helped to popularize the Sinterklaas stories when he referred to St. Nick as the patron saint of New York in his book, The History of New York. So now it's got major distribution, and New York's a place where if you say something like that, that's going to take hold. Washington Irving is well known, and he basically declares secularly that St. Nick is the patron saint of New York, and therefore the imagery of Jean Pintard 5 years earlier explodes into the consciousness of the biggest city in the very young United States. As his prominence grew, and angry cab drivers, as his prominence grew, Sinterklaas was described as everything from a rascal with a blue three-cornered hat, red waistcoat, yellow stockings, to a man wearing a broad-brimmed hat and a huge pair of Flemish trunk hose. Hose, as in pantaloons. Gift giving, mainly centered around children, had been an important part of the Christmas celebration generally since the holiday's rejuvenation in the 19th century. This is a Christian rejuvenation of the holiday. And then stores began to advertise Christmas shopping in around 1820. By 1840, newspapers were creating separate sections for holiday advertisements, which often featured images of this newly popular Santa Claus that Washington Irving and John Pintard had gotten into the civic consciousness. In 1841, thousands of children visited a Philadelphia shop to see a life-size Santa Claus model. And it was only a matter of time before these stories began to attract children and their parents with this lure at the peak of a live Santa. In the early 1890s, the Salvation Army was running out of money, and they needed to pay for the free meals they were giving out to needy families, and so they began to dress unemployed men as Sinterklaas, or Santa Claus, in a red coat, red hats, sent them out into the streets of New York to solicit donation, ringing the bells that everyone in America is familiar with. Every time you walk up to a store around this time of the year, there's someone out there ringing a bell with the Salvation Army drum to this day, asking for a donation. And that is how the notion of Santa Claus goes from St. Nick to this jolly old guy, thanks to John Pintard and Washington Irving and people who were trying to capitalize on the commercialism of the gift giving that had come along for children and created these massive wide page advertising sections in papers. That's how it gets to where it is. That's how Santa Claus gets to where he is in our minds today. So that's where Santa comes from. We got one more thing to talk about tonight. The holiday special was never going to be a long thing. So we have to frame up what I consider to be...
My lord!
You're welcome, Rocket. We're going to frame up what I believe to be one of the most crazy displays of human benevolence in history. So we're going to...
Ho, ho, ho.
We're going to focus in on this map right here. Europe in 1914. For those of you unacquainted with history, World War I starts in 1914. But how we get there is nuts. And it's very much rooted in the thing we're currently talking about during our French Revolution series. We talked about the levée en masse, very recently and conveniently timed. The levée en masse was when the late 18th century revolutionary Republican government basically created the first military-industrial state. And they created the first arms race. Up until that point, in 1793, nations had waged war with small professional armies, and it had been more of a chess match. No, I didn't talk about Nicaea that much, except that they pretty much exacerbated the timing problem. But I didn't get into how, because it's not consequential to how the 25th got to the 21st became the 25th. But the levée en masse creates a situation where France is employing everybody. Old people, women were nurses and making bandages, children were pulling lint to make bandages, married men were turning cannon, making guns, and every young man who was unmarried was fighting. And we're going to get to the point in our French Revolution series where a man named Napoleon Bonaparte inherits that in almost at the turn of the 19th century. And Napoleon barnstorms across Europe. He just takes out everybody with his grand army. That was the first holy crap moment for Europe. And what it does is it creates momentum behind, okay,
Je vais vous
that guy.
un triomphe terrible en rousse avec mes water slide.
Napoleon steamrolls Europe, and the rest of Europe, all the chancellors of all the European countries are going, holy crap, if we're going to do anything about this and potential future instances of this, We need to fashion our militaries in the same way that France and Napoleon did. And Napoleon does a lot of things that modernizes the military in a way that we would recognize today. But the important thing for this conversation is it kicks off a century in Europe of arms races, not only from the standpoint of size of army and the production state readiness of a nation to go to war, but technological innovation. I'll actually draw it because we don't need Saturn over here anymore. We'll get rid of this guy here. We've covered Saturn. Everyone understands what we talked about with Saturn. We'll go ahead and drop him out of here. We'll get him gone. You have to realize that technology of warfare over the course of time was basically a slowly rising line, right? It slowly rose, and then you get to Napoleon. It goes like this. You could honestly say that about right here is Napoleon in terms of when does technology take off for warfare. And so you could say that this, between these two lines, is between Napoleon and World War I. Dramatic, increasing and ever steepening curve of technological military advancement. It kicks off with him. And throughout the entire 19th century, nations are no longer focused on the idea of, well, we just need a bigger army, but we need a better equipped army and navy. And so all of these nations, Austria-Hungary, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Prussian then become German Empire, the French Republic and Empire, depending on when you talk about them, the British Empire, even the United States, the failing Ottomans, soon to be just Turkey. They all go into this crunch. But the Japanese get in there at the end of it too. The Russians are in there at the end of it, but not early. But the point is that technological advancement becomes so quick that if your battleship is 10 years old, it's probably obsolete. And this massive arms race that occurred in Europe across the 19th century broke countries. It created such financial problems. It's one of the main contributors to why Russia fell and became the Soviet Union, but it created these massive financial problems. It also created the need for entangling alliances. And as you get to the end of the 19th century, everyone kind of knows that a big war is coming, and they're jockeying for position. And Germany had always had been on the standpoint of basically don't piss off Russia because they're huge. And regardless of how mundane they may be technologically, they can simply muster bajillion troops. And a young man named Kaiser Wilhelm II screws that up. And it leaves us in a situation as we roll into the 20th century where France, Russia are allies. Austria-Hungary and Germany are allies. And you have Britain sitting out there to the side, kind of just trying to mind their own business, but they're signatories to a treaty that maintains Belgium neutrality. So as we roll into June 1914, the heir to the Austria-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is in Sarajevo, which was Yugoslavia when I was a kid and is not anymore. Franz Joseph, not his dad, but his uncle, is really old and going to die soon. The problem is that the Austrians have been effectively being horrible to the Slavs that live in the Balkan Peninsula for a long time. And some of the Slavs there have had enough. And they engage with, especially one man named Gavrilo Princip, was an organization called the Black Hand, which is the Serbian Secret Service. Well, it's a kind of a shadow portion of the Serbian Secret Service, and they conspire to kill the heir to the Austrian throne, and they do it in June 1914. Well, Austria obviously is pretty mad about that, and they decide they want to do something to Serbia. They want to spank the crap out of them. The problem is
Remember
that
to clonk that follow button.
Serbia is a Slav nation. Yeah, I can tell that story. Gavrilo Princip's the group that was trying to assassinate Franz Ferdinand, failed. They failed. They tried to get him on a bridge with what would be called bombs, with early precursors of hand grenades. They threw it, it bounced off a car, it killed a couple other people. And they're like, crap, let's go home. And Gavrilo Princip
Ho, ho, ho.
Gavrilo Princip heads off and goes to get a sandwich. And after Franz Ferdinand's motorcade leaves the reception in Sarajevo and is going to go to the hospital to go see the people that were injured, the driver makes a wrong turn and go down the wrong street. And these are early cars, right? Old crank cars. And they had to back it up, which was a pain in the butt to do. And so as they're trying to get the car into reverse, Gavrilo Princip walks out of the front door of this eatery he was having a sandwich in, realizes that the guy he was sent to Sarajevo to assassinate's right there in front of him in a stalled car, fires his gun twice, kills Franz Ferdinand and his wife, and we're off and running to World War I. That's the summary of how he did it on accident. But again, Austria wanted to spank the crap. Yeah, Gavrilo Princip has the single greatest impact on what we understand to be the 20th century, and it was a matter of coincidence that this all goes down. But again, Austria wants to do something to Serbia. They don't have any evidence of it, but they realize that the assassin was Serbian, and they want to do something to Serbia. So they send Serbia this ridiculous list of demands that Serbia can't possibly meet. But they only do so after Germany says, yep, we got your back. And the reason Austria needed Germany to have its back is because Serbia is a Slav nation. And out there being the protector of all Slavs is Russia, who is allied to France. So once Austria gets the green light from Kaiser Wilhelm, who really didn't look at the tactical situation or the strategic situation, Austria hands this ultimatum list to the Serbians and like, we can't possibly do this. And we're going to get into all these details when we get to World War I in episode 5657. But the thing that matters here is Serbia goes, we can't do anything. And they go, Russia, please help. And Russia does the thing that triggers everything. They mobilize. They declare their beginning mobilization. Well, that's when we'll take Sarajevo off the map here. And Sarajevo is, yellow is probably the wrong color for that, don't you think? Because it's all yellow there. Sarajevo, for those of you that can't see it very closely, is right there. I know that's blurry, but it'll be off the screen in a second. There's Sarajevo right there. That's where it all goes down. And the assassins basically came in from Serbia. So Russia, as soon as the declaration of this is what you got to do to keep us from annihilating you comes out from Austria, Russia declares mobilization. Well, that creates a problem. Because that was the trigger for what is known as the Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan was developed by Count Alfred von Schlieffen in the late 19th century. It's on paper as 1905. But the idea here was, okay, if Russia mobilizes, I'm Germany. If Russia mobilizes, I've got a problem because Russia's on my east side and France is on my west side. The only thing that makes sense here for us to do is take out the lesser of these powers as quickly as possible by knocking out France fast. And that's what the Schlieffen Plan here is. The Schlieffen Plan, the problem for the Germans is they have to go through Belgium to get into France because this blue line is called the Maginot Line. By the way, I'm in full memory mode here now. The Maginot Line makes coming through the French frontier direct impossible for the Germans. So they've been planning for decades about when this eventually happens, because everyone knew that they had to eventually have this war in some form. The Germans were going to sweep through Belgium very quickly, take out France, knock them out, and then turn around, look back to the east and go, okay, Russia, now it's a one-on-one fight. We can focus everything on you. And the Germans came super close to doing it. Like they were within 50 kilometers of Paris close in the first couple months of the war in the West. But Gilly's right. Britain had a treaty to protect Belgium neutrality. So when the Germans begin their own mobilization, they're not mobilizing to go over and face Russia. They're mobilizing to come over to France. And Belgium starts going, Britain, you're supposed to be securing our neutrality. And France, at the same time, had kind of a gentleman's agreement with Britain to be allies. They didn't have anything formal. And they're going, hey, you can come down here and help us? And Britain's really coy about it. They're really like, well, yeah. And the Germans are telling the British, look, stay out of this. It's a piece of paper. Don't get drug into something that's going to be over quick because of Belgium. Is it worth it? But the British decide that they have to stand by their word and their honor, otherwise it would be useless, and I agree with that. And once the first German boot comes across the frontier into Belgium, the British get in a war. So now it's Britain, France on the Western Front, and all of what the British Empire is at that time, which is colonies everywhere. In Africa, out in the East, in India, and you'll see African and Indian and Asian troops fighting in France and in Flanders in World War I. So what happens is the Germans, they had this plan down to the point where they knew how many axles of how many rail cars would go over each bridge as they transported troops to the West. And they got really close. Like, they were marching just east of Paris close. And then the French counterattacked, pushed the Germans back. We will cover all this in more detail when we get to this section of actual world history and the series proper. And they pushed them back toward Belgium. And then what happens is they settle into what is known as trench warfare. Now, trench warfare didn't originate in World War I, but it is famous in World War I. And these trenches, they moved a little bit, but over the course of 4 years, they moved very little. The highly mobile fighting was out in the east with the Russians and down in, near what is now Istanbul, Constantinople, the Battle of Gallipoli. Those were all more traditional for the time infantry type fights. I probably covered like 10 episodes worth the last 10 minutes. You're not wrong. But the trenches were horrible. You have to understand that the trenches were the day where the machine gun, the air-cooled and liquid-cooled machine gun were coming along. And these trenches were dug, and on occasion, troops would come over, they called it going over the top, come over the top of the rampart of the trench on either side, and they'd try to make a rush across this desolate area that was completely covered by infantry, the first machine gun teams, not really air support at the time, but eventually tanks at Fleur-Courcelette, the first tanks would roll in World War I and end the trench problem. But in 1914, for the first few months, the battle on the Western Front was very fluid, and then it settled into this trench warfare setup along this red line, and that's a huge amount of territory. You have French and British Empire troops sitting on their side, and you have the Germans largely sitting on their side. The Austrians wouldn't really come and help them. They'd be too busy dealing with the Serbia that they underestimated. So it's these groups are just sitting there every day, watching their friends go over the top and get mowed down, and then watching the enemy come over the top and mowing them down. And the thing is when the war started, it was, of course, advertised as, well, of course, it'll be quick and easy, and of course, we'll surely win by all sides. No one expected the war to last till Christmas. No one expected there to still be fighting in December of 1914. But there these guys were, taken from all over the world, from the United Kingdom, from France, from Germany, from Africa and India and everywhere. And they were here, stuck in these trenches, and these trenches were horrifying. World War II gets a lot of publicity and everything in our modern consciousness because of the Nazis and how evil the Nazis were, right? And they are evil, and I'm not diminishing that at all. But life in the trenches was horrible, because on top of going over the top or watching the other side come over the top, artillery had become a thing, and German artillery especially was really good. The French were better at zeroing targets, but the mechanisms on the German side were better. And they just lobbed shells at each other all day long. They just had it figured out how many shells per minute they could fire and keep up with production capacities back home and logistics chains back home. And so these guys were sitting in these mud-filled, rain-filled trenches, sometimes packed, the walls have been packed with the bodies of their own comrades, living there like that for months, and it would turn into years. But what happened on Christmas Eve, 1914, is simply amazing. And this is where we get to the heartwarming part, Archie, because the Pope had reached out to all the powers and said, please, for one night, can we not fight? Can we just have peace? In the spirit of the season, the day on which the angels sang, can we just have peace? And the powers that be said, nope, no way, we're not going to do that. And what happens spontaneously all along this red line. It wasn't any organized effort from any central command. Individual men, individual men on the front lines looked at each other across the line. They would sing songs. They were singing songs around the holidays. They were trading barbs with each other, and then joking with each other. And eventually they started looking at each other and saying, hey, tomorrow if you don't shoot, we won't shoot. And it got quiet, got silent for the first time in months for these guys. There was no gunfire because they didn't shoot on this one day. And then in specific places all along this red line, guys started standing up Christmas trees along the ridges of the ramparts. And then they started standing up themselves out of the trenches, which is suicide in trench warfare setting. They started standing up and they started walking toward each other. These are guys who, the day beforehand, were shooting each other and were killing each other's friends because somebody somewhere had told them that that's what they're supposed to be doing. And they said enough is enough on this one day. And the immediate officers present were like, what do we do? And they allowed it to happen. And it's known as the Christmas truce. And these guys exchanged gifts and petted each other's trench pet dogs and cats and played soccer matches with each other. And it comes down to me that this is the quintessential concept of decency. These guys weren't enemies. Their nations were. But they weren't. And they came together as brothers in a really crappy situation for like a day and a half. Not even that in some cases. But can you imagine that? They got out of the trenches, gave each other chocolate bars and cigarettes, exchanged and had a look at each other's girls back home, tried to talk when there was language barriers, and they played soccer matches together. And the guns were piled up and put to the side. And the artillery didn't fire. And then they had to go back to their trenches, and the next day they had to go back to killing each other. But for one day, there was peace that no one else had called for. These guys had just decided that in the spirit of this holiday, that they were going to be basically decent to each other. Civility in war. So I promise every once in a while that there's music in this show, and we're going to wind this show down today, which does not have a quiz, with this. And I hope you enjoy it.
It's the night of December the 24th, 1914, on the Western Front. The industrial might of the new 20th century has been focused into a war that has been going on for 5 months. Everyone thought it would be over by Christmas. But sadly, such hopes have now died alongside the young men in the clinging mud and cold of the trenches. On the run-up to Christmas, Pope Benedict XV begged the warring governments to call a truce and asked that the guns may fall silent, at least upon the night the angels sang. But it was no use. In the trenches, sometimes just 30 meters apart, the men of both sides often shout insults to each other above the sounds of battle. On Christmas Eve, a cry comes over from the German side in broken English. Tomorrow, you no shoot. We no shoot. The British and French are incredulous. Then along the trenches, there's a movement. But instead of seeing the sight of men going over the top, this time, pushed up above the top of the trenches, Christmas trees start to appear along the German lines, lit up by flickering candles. Is it a ruse? Could it be real? Could the regular soldiers on the front lines make a peace at Christmas when the church could not? On the wind, drifting across no man's land, there's a sound of hope and cheer as Christmas carols are sung. The gentle murmur becomes stronger and is picked up by more and more of the soldiers. As Christmas Eve becomes Christmas Day, the British and French join in too. As the morning draws, there's silence. In a farmhouse a short distance away from the front line is 18-year-old Scotsman Alfred Anderson. He vividly recalled that Christmas Day and said, "I remember the silence, the eerie sound of silence. Only the guards were on duty. We all went outside the farm buildings and just stood listening. And of course, thinking of people back home. All I'd heard for 2 months in the trenches was the hissing, cracking and whining of bullets in flight, machine gun fire and distant German voices. But there was a dead silence that morning, right across the land as far as you could see. We shouted, 'Merry Christmas!'
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Even though nobody felt merry.
Night.
My lord?
No.
Ein Dritter kommt! Ein Dritter kommt!
Jim, don't do it!
Halt! Er ist nicht bewaffnet!
Silence! Oh, I remember the silence on a cold winter day. After many months on the battlefield, and we were used to the violence. Then all the cannons went silent, and the snow fell. Voices sang to me from no man's land. We are all, we are all, we are all, we are all friends. And today we're all brothers, tonight we're all friends. Our moment of peace in a war that never ends. Today we're all brothers, we drink and unite. Now Christmas has arrived and the snow turns the ground white. Hear carols from the trenches, we sing a holy night. Our guns play to rest on wood snowflakes. Our Christmas in the trenches, our Christmas on the front, far from home. Madness, how I remember the sadness. We were hiding our tears in a foreign land where we faced our fears. We were soldiers, carried the war on our shoulders for our nations. Is that why we bury our friends? We were all friends. And today we're all brothers, tonight we're all friends. Our moment of peace in a war that never ends. Today we're all brothers, we drink and unite. Now Christmas has arrived and the snow turns the ground white. Here we sing a holy night. Our guns laid to rest on snowflakes. Our Christmas in the trenches, our Christmas on the front, far from home. Tonight we're all friends. A moment of peace in a war that never ends. Today we're all brothers. We drink and unite. Now Christmas has arrived and the snow turns the ground white.
What the hell are you doing? Shut the bloody crap!
We walk among our friends. We don't think about tomorrow. The battle will commence when we celebrate your Christmas.
Hell, you
We pause about our friends. Those who never made it home.
Don't
When the
care!
battle had commenced.
There were many matches along the lines that day, some with proper footballs, some with bully beef cans, some were disorganized scrambles for the ball. Robert Graves reported that in his match, the Germans won 3-2. The Argyll and Southern Highlanders reported their match ended 4-1 to Scotland. An estimated 100,000 men took part in the Christmas truce. As the men moved back to their trenches, Captain Charles Stockwell took it upon himself to fire 3 shots skyward. He raised a flag upon which was written, "Merry Christmas." His German opposite raised a flag that read, "Thank you." The 2 men then stood on the ramparts and saluted each other. Alfred Anderson, the young Scotsman, survived the war and lived to the age of 109. He said of the end of the truce, "The silence ended in the early afternoon. It was a short peace in a terrible war." But one of the most remarkable quotes comes from a young soldier who, despite being away from his family for the first time, said of the events on that day, "I wouldn't have missed it for the most gorgeous Christmas dinner in England."
Thanks to Sabaton.
Remember
for
to clonk
making
that
it
follow
possible
button.
for me to do that. They never ever have a problem with me with copyright. The credits at the end there were for their music video, which is a different depiction of the Christmas truce. But what I did instead was to assemble some images from films you've never seen. Joyeux Noël in 2005. Joyeux Noël in 2005 is one of those films, if you're interested. But to answer the first question that came up in chat, I wonder how hard it was to go back to fighting. That's why there was no truce in 1915. Troops tried, and the officers were organized for it then and had orders to prevent it. And there's a reason I included the scene of the German soldier being shot after the initial rifleman had been reluctant to do so, because that base reluctance was pervasive on the trenches after the Christmas truce, where they had just played soccer with these guys. They didn't want to kill each other, but they were forced back into it. And the statement that, most involved wars are just normal humans doing things horrible to each other because of what a few other folks want them to do. The idea that we're not enemies. None of us are enemies. Nations can be enemies, but people are not enemies of each other. No matter what you believe, religiously or politically, personally, we are not each other's enemies. And if we could find that again, this pervasive polarity in who we are today might find some sort of peaceable resolution. But the Christmas truce to me is two things. One, it is one of the single most stupendous displays of what human beings are capable of. Machiavelli would have you believe that everybody individually at their base nature is going to take advantage of a situation whenever possible. But when we are together and we see how what we are doing impacts others, that's when humans rise up and become what they can be. And that's why the Christmas truce stands out to me, because this war will end in 1918 when we get to it. It only lasts 4 years, but it sets up something worse. It sets up World War II.
My lord?
Uh-huh.
Ho, ho.
When humans can stop and remember that we are not enemies because of our differences, that we are all better when we simply function together, the world's a much better place. The Christmas truce came about because of the Christmas holiday, which, like we talked about throughout the episode tonight, it originates in solstice festivals and gets organized by the Romans and then co-opted by a Syrian sun cult, and then Constantine creates the Roman Catholic structure when he dies, and the early Roman Catholic Church misplaces the date because of a calendar system, and it leads to this day in 1914 where everyone stops, and because of all of that, they say no. For at least for today, no, we are not going to hurt each other. That's the power of what Christmas is to me. I'm not going to belabor the point, and I don't want to end the show on a downer, but that's why I ended it with this. There are many other instances of great things that have been inspired by Christmas, but this, to me, the Christmas truce in 1914 is the pinnacle of human potential. And it was all inspired because of a Christmas holiday. It's not about gifts. It's not about what you get. It's not even about your ability to give. It's about your ability to be humane, decent, and good to each other, regardless of if you differ with each other on what you think of things. So I hope you all have enjoyed a holiday special. I wanted to do it for this reason, for this message. I hope you've learned something tonight and maybe have expanded your understanding of why Christmas is the day it is. Yo, Megan Jake, with the resub, 18 months. Thank you very much, my friend. Also, on that note, CF resubbed in there. Again, CF, thank you for the raid. Cat Food, the band, which is CF, Diggity, and Ben, thank you for the use of your music tonight. Hopefully you all enjoyed this. Hopefully you all take home that message that just being decent is what makes humans great. But hopefully that we also walk away and realize that Christmas isn't the only reason for us to be decent and human and good to each other. And that's kind of the mindset we should have all year long. And if maybe we stop looking at people and getting angry about why they're different from us and simply respect the fact that we are all in this together as human beings, maybe we can find some semblance of calm and common ground. I wish you all the happiest of holidays, no matter how you celebrate them,
My lord.
or what your background around it is, whether it's secular or religious, whether you do it or not. I wish you the best this season. I will be spending my day safely with my parents on Saturday or Friday night. We will celebrate the Wilia, which is a Polish vigil for Christmas. It's about the unexpected guest traveler, and I get to eat pierogies and sauerkraut and all this great food my mom makes. Whatever your tradition, whatever your persuasion, however you come to be motivated to celebrate what is the feeling of this season, I wish you the best with your family. Heavy Metal History will be back the first Saturday after the new year, when we will pick up with the Reign of Terror, which I agree was not the best thing to be covering during the holidays. Lethos. Just on my way to drive 6,000 kilometers and just stopped to write. That was one of the greatest Christmas stories I ever heard. Many thanks, man. Great stream. Lethos, thank you for chatting in chat and letting us know you enjoyed it. This is a great community that does a lot of good through history. If you're interested in more, YouTube links below. You can come back and catch me there on Saturdays or catch up on the YouTube VODs, and that goes for everybody. I'm glad you were here tonight. I'm glad you all were here. Let's see if there's anybody we can raid. The holiday special was never going to be so there's the Discord. Hang out with us there as well. Our excellent friend J Mitch is driving Wreckfest. You know what? I don't get to raid Richie Cranium hardly ever, and he has raided me multiple times with his viewership. Richie Cranium is a good member of the Outlaws community and the Cat Food community, and he is playing some Minecraft on his vacation. I have the Christmas Truce video saved, and it will be placed into YouTube as an unlisted video later tomorrow. If you would just want to rewatch that part, that link will be in Discord tomorrow sometime. The episode tonight will in its full will go to YouTube right after the credits roll tonight. We're gonna go over to say hello to Richie again. Happy holidays to everybody. Truly value this community and everything we do for each other, and simply by the fact that we are all different in this community. We all think differently, and we all have different perspectives and views, and somehow yet we all come together, stick together, stand up for each other, support each other, and we just need to continue to spread that kind of idea to other people. And that, to me, is what Christmas is. You guys have a great night. We're going to get into our outro here, and then we'll go raid Richie. Thank you all for being here. I will see you probably for an impromptu stream at some point, because I'm still off for like another 12 days. Probably a video game or two in there. But again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for consuming this. No quiz. That is your Christmas present. Have a great night. Don't forget, hang out with Odd Dustin tomorrow morning and weekday mornings at 7:30 in the morning. Our good friend Permanoob is on vacation for the holidays, but after the holidays, come back and catch him at 10 o'clock in the morning, weekdays. Yo, Mega Jake in there, by the way, is streaming of the holidays, though he's not in the shoutouts tonight. Give him a follow as well. There's Gilly. Sundays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. I think he's back in the Dragon Age Inquisition now. Give him a follow as well. And then there's Intent Rocket Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturday mornings. Playing Crusader Kings last. Also likes to play a lot of Ubisoft games. Big Assassin's Creed fan. There's CF Live. gave us a lot of music for this show. Give him a follow. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. Go follow CF and hang out with him. He's a great guy. And then our good friend, Mr. Land Diggity, also part of Cat Food. Hit him up as well. Hang out with him over the holidays and beyond. A great friend. I will talk to you all later. Let's go raid Richie. Have a great holiday.
Be excellent to each other.